Most people don't realize this yet, but the biggest threat to the United States isn't a war, a recession, or even a political crisis. It's a group of countries the West spent years underestimating. And here's the shocking part. While everyone was busy arguing about elections, inflation, and social media drama, BRICS was quietly building the most coordinated challenge to global dollar dominance since the end of World War II. The world didn't notice, but the markets did. Think about this. Every global empire in history believed it would last forever, until the moment it didn't. The British pound fell, the Roman denarius collapsed, and now, for the first time in a century, the US dollar faces a real rival, not from one country, but a coalition representing more people, more resources, and more growth than any Western institution ever predicted. That's the paradox no one wants to admit. The world's strongest currency is being challenged by nations that were once considered too poor or too unstable to matter. And if you stay with me until the end of this video, you're going to understand the part the media never explains, the part that actually affects your life. You'll see how BRICS expansion, China-Russia trade, and the push for a potential BRICS currency could reshape investments, energy prices, geopolitics, and even your savings. This isn't just another political story. This is the blueprint of a multipolar world forming right in front of us. And once you understand what's happening, you'll never look at the global economy the same way again. BRICS didn't begin as a grand geopolitical project, but as a simple acronym coined by Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill in the early 2000s. Yet somehow it grew into something far bigger. Back then, nobody imagined these emerging economies would one day challenge global dollar dominance. But as each nation dealt with Western financial pressure and sought a larger voice, the idea of forming a bloc became irresistible. In many ways, BRICS was born from a shared desire to escape the limits imposed by traditional power structures. That early spark set the stage for what would later become a multipolar world conversation. As Brazil, Russia, India, and China realized their combined GDP represented over 25% of the global economy, they understood the weight they carried when aligned. Their leaders saw BRICS as more than just a diplomatic club. It was a vehicle to reshape the global economy shift already underway. South Africa's entry in 2010 added strategic value, giving the group reach across Latin America, Eurasia, and Africa. It felt like watching neighbors who individually struggled to be heard suddenly form a chorus loud enough to influence the system. Yet the deeper motive was clear: independence from Western-dominated institutions. Eventually, BRICS evolved into a platform that pushed back against the status quo. Each country had its frustrations with how the IMF and World Bank operated, especially in moments of crisis. For example, Russia faced sanctions. Brazil and South Africa battled unstable capital flows. India and China navigated competing interests with the West. Individually, they were vulnerable, but together they sensed leverage. Their alliance hinted at future tools like a BRICS currency, coordinated financing, and de-dollarization strategies, ideas that would later challenge the foundations of the US-led order. And this early formation sets the tone for why the dollar's dominance became the next big question on the table. The US dollar didn't dominate the world overnight. It climbed to the top through a mix of timing, trust, and sheer geopolitical muscle. After World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement tied major currencies to the dollar, making it the backbone of the global system. Countries trusted the United States because its economy was stable, its institutions were strong, and its military reach guaranteed global security. Over time, this created a network effect so powerful that even rivals relied on the dollar for trade. That's exactly why any attempt at de-dollarization faces such an uphill climb. Even today, more than 58% of global foreign reserves are held in US dollars, and nearly 90% of international transactions involve the dollar at some stage. That sheer dominance gives the US enormous influence, sometimes too much for the comfort of other nations. When Washington imposes sanctions, it's essentially weaponizing the same financial highways the world uses daily. For emerging nations like the BRICS members, this dependence became a strategic vulnerability. Many analysts compare it to relying on a single bridge to reach your destination, convenient until the owner decides who gets to cross. The strength of the dollar also comes from America's deep financial markets. U.S. Treasury bonds, for example, are considered the safest asset on Earth, attracting investors during every crisis, from the 2008 collapse to the pandemic shock. I once heard an economist say, "When the world panics, it buys dollars," and that still holds true. But this very stability creates a paradox. The more dominant the dollar becomes, the more other nations, especially BRICS members, feel compelled to create alternatives. And that desire takes us straight into the BRICS vision for a multipolar world, where financial power isn't concentrated in one country's hands. For nations like the BRICS, the idea of a multipolar world isn't just political theory, it's a survival strategy. They've long felt that global rules were written by Western powers and reinforced by institutions like the IMF and World Bank. These institutions often tie loans to strict conditions that reshape domestic policies, something many BRICS members have experienced firsthand. By cooperating, they envisioned carving out more autonomy, building systems that reflect their own priorities. It's almost like finally having the chance to write your own playbook after years of being forced to use someone else's. Their push for a global economy shift centers on one core idea: balance. Instead of relying on the US dollar for nearly all international trade, BRICS members want mechanisms that give them financial breathing room. The creation of the new development bank in 2014 was a clear signal. They were done waiting for reform inside Western institutions. I remember interviewing an economist who said, "You can't compete in a game where the referee, the scoreboard, and the rule book belong to the same team." That comment encapsulated why BRICS countries believe alternative institutions are necessary. The bloc's broader vision involves expanding local currency trade, supporting infrastructure development, and even exploring a BRICS currency that could coexist alongside national currencies. These aren't abstract ideas. They represent real attempts to counter the vulnerabilities that come from depending on the dollar. And while the world debates whether such a currency is feasible, the intent behind it is unmistakable: shift power away from a single financial center. This sets the stage for something even more concrete: the actual moves BRICS nations have taken to challenge global dollar dominance, which are already reshaping global trade patterns. BRICS didn't just talk about challenging global dollar dominance, they started building the tools to do it. One of the first major steps was the new development bank, NDB, created to finance infrastructure without the political strings often found in Western institutions. With over $30 billion already approved in project funding, the NDB has become a real alternative for emerging markets. It's not just a bank, it's a statement that BRICS nations can create their own financial ecosystem. And every loan issued in local currency chips away at dollar dependence a little more. Another major move has been the development of alternative payment systems. Russia's MIR and China's CIPS began as domestic tools, but their integration into BRICS discussions signals a bigger ambition: creating payment channels insulated from U.S. sanctions. Add to that the sharp rise in China-Russia trade, where more than 90% of bilateral transactions now occur in yuan or rubles, and you can see de-dollarization happening in real time. I often compare it to changing the operating system on your phone, not because the old one stopped working, but because you want control over your own updates. These actions are part of a broader global trend as countries from Southeast Asia to the Middle East explore non-dollar trade. Even major commodity deals like China buying oil from Russia and Saudi Arabia in yuan signal a shift that was unthinkable a decade ago. Each of these steps might seem small on its own, but together they create momentum that's hard to ignore. Still, what truly amplifies BRICS' influence is something else entirely: the group's expansion into a larger, more powerful coalition capable of reshaping energy markets and trade flows.
The expansion of BRICS marked a turning point, transforming the bloc from a symbolic coalition into a genuine global counterweight. When countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Iran, and Ethiopia were invited to join. It signaled a new phase. BRICS was no longer just a group of emerging markets. It was becoming a geopolitical force. Adding major energy producers amplified the bloc's leverage in ways that weren't possible before. It's one thing to challenge global dollar dominance with financial tools. It's another when you control a significant portion of the world's oil supply. Saudi Arabia alone exports over 7 million barrels of oil per day, and the idea of even a fraction of that being traded outside the dollar shakes the foundation of the global financial system. The petrodollar has been a pillar of U.S. power since the 1970s, so BRICS expansion directly touches the core of the current order. I often think of it like adding heavyweight players to a chessboard. Suddenly, every move carries more strategic weight. With the UAE's financial networks, Iran's regional influence, and Egypt's control of the Suez Canal, the bloc now touches every major trade route. For emerging economies, joining BRICS represents an opportunity to align with a multipolar world and escape over-reliance on Western systems. Many of these nations see the bloc as a path to diversify partnerships, secure funding, and participate in the global economy shift. Yet expansion also brings challenges. More voices mean more competing interests. Still, the possibility of coordinated energy pricing or unified stance on non-dollar trade pushes the world a step closer to rebalancing power. And that naturally leads to the question everyone asks, can BRICS really break the dollar's dominance, or is this shift still more symbolic than structural? Predicting whether BRICS can truly undermine global dollar dominance is a lot like forecasting the weather in a region with shifting winds, possible but full of variables. One realistic scenario is gradual multipolarity, where regional currency blocks gain strength, while the dollar remains important but not unrivaled. Economists point out that even a small reduction in dollar-based trade, say 5 to 10%, could reshape global finance. BRICS nations understand this, which is why they keep exploring tools like a digital BRICS currency. It wouldn't replace their national currencies, but it could serve as a shared bridge for trade. Still, internal challenges can't be ignored. BRICS members have very different political systems, economic models, and long-term strategic goals. India's economic rivalry with China, Brazil's shifting political priorities, and Russia's need to navigate sanctions all complicate a unified path. One analyst compared BRICS to a band with superstar musicians who rarely agree on the music. And that's the paradox. Their collective power is immense, but coordination remains their biggest obstacle. Investors watching this trend often diversify into emerging market ETFs, gold, or even yuan-denominated bonds to hedge against long-term U.S. dollar decline scenarios. And yet, despite these challenges, the momentum is undeniable. As China-Russia trade continues growing and more countries adopt de-dollarization practices, the question isn't whether the system will change, but how fast. Some see BRICS expansion as just symbolic. Others believe it marks the beginning of a global economy shift that could redefine power for decades. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And that's exactly where the story gets interesting, because it forces us to ask, are we witnessing the early cracks in the dollar's supremacy, or just the first chapter of a much longer transformation? When you look at everything happening, from the rise of BRICS to the wave of de-dollarization, it becomes clear that we're not just living through another economic cycle, we're witnessing a global realignment, a shift in power, influence, and currency that will shape the next decades. And understanding these moves isn't just interesting, it's essential. Because whether you invest, run a business, or simply care about your future, these changes will affect you directly. So now the real question becomes, what do you think happens next? Will the BRICS coalition accelerate a true multipolar world, or will the dollar adapt and reinforce its dominance once again? Do you believe a BRICS currency could realistically gain traction, or is this movement more symbolic than structural?
And how will this expanding bloc, now stretching across Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, reshape the global game board? If you want to keep understanding the forces that shape our world, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel is where you learn the things the news doesn't explain, the context, the power struggles, the economic shifts, and the future that's being built right now. So tell me in the comments, is the dollar's supremacy ending or just being tested?